why did the Jews commit the great sin of putting God himself to death? The Jews as a nation refused to accept Christ, and since this time they have been wanderers on the earth. The worst deed of the Jewish people was the murder of the Messiah. Jews, evidently, were not loved by God. In my religion books, it sounded as if somehow they missed the boat.
The Jews were responsible for the death of Christ, as far as I remember from the Catholic school that I went to.
I guess the Catholic Church at the time when I was little said that the Jews were responsible for Jesus' death.
Jesus was killed by the Jews.
The Jews were responsible.
I was taught that Jesus was killed by Jews. The Jews.
I'm on my way to Wisconsin, where I grew up. I'm going to visit St. Catherine's, the convent in Racine, where I became a nun 67 years ago.
Okay, ma'am. She's going to take you outside.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome on board this flight 2254 from Newark to Milwaukee. Flight time this morning, 1 hour and 55 minutes.
I've had cancer, and I am a diabetic. And now I got pulmonary hypertension. It's hard to breathe. I have to carry an oxygen supply around with me. Traveling isn't as easy as I'd like it to be, but I'm really looking forward to going home, to be with my sisters. I was born in Plain, Wisconsin, and there were 11 children. I'm in the middle. I have 5 brothers and 5 sisters. It was a very Catholic family. We prayed 3 times a day, prayed our rosary with the family every evening. We were all Catholics. No African Americans, 1 Protestant family, and certainly no Jewish families. And we were on a farm. All dead. Where are the corns? When my father's corn was ready to be cultivated and harvested, it was above his head. And he was so proud of his cornfields. At one time, my father and I were driving through Plain, and he whispered to me, "We have a new pharmacist, and I think he's Jewish." And I said, "Daddy, why did you whisper that?" And I didn't get an answer from my father. And then I asked my mother, "Who are the Jews?" Why is that? Because I read here that the Jews killed Christ, killed Jesus. And who are the Jews? Well, she told me again, they are the people that killed Jesus. And that was in my books. And then I said, why can't Jews get to heaven? Why do you ask me? It says here that the Jews have to wander around the face of the earth without a homeland of their own. Why can't they get to heaven? Because they killed Jesus.
I'm sure the first time I ever heard the word Jew was in church, in hearing the Gospels read. And the first thing I heard about the Jew was that the Jew killed Jesus.
The charge that Jews are Christ killers has echoed and re-echoed through the centuries. Many Catholics of many generations grew up with this notion.
Pilate again asked them,
"What am I to do with the man you call the King of the Jews?"
I think it's impossible to read the scriptures as a kid, to go to the Stations of the Cross, or to listen to the reading of the Passion according to St. John, and not hear the overtones. It stuck with me, and I think if that's repeated enough times, of course it has to have an effect.
coming into Siena Center. Right there it is. That's the chapel. And you see the bell tower. And you see St. Catherine underneath. What brings me back here is certainly my love for the Sisters of St. Dominic. It's like you're going home. And it gives one strength and helps one, energizes one.
Good to see you. But you gotta come to see you.
Right, so I want to sit right over here.
Okay.
Clara.
That's good.
Been praying for you all the while. Blessed the Lord, we thank you we are about to receive
You can pick what
about
you
it.
want.
Amen. Cover the souls of the faithful departed. Mercy of God, rest in peace. Amen.
I just want to say welcome.
Right, thank you so much. Thank you. Good.
You're part of our big Dominican family.
I know.
We miss you, but we always keep in contact with you through our prayers.
Thank you. And you have to carry on my work when my oxygen gives out.
That's right. Yeah. So we'll
A
see
year and a
you
half
around
to
again.
go. I have a year and a half yet. That's what the doctor said. But we're going to prove him wrong. I'm going to prove him wrong. I'm not going to heaven yet. Like my mama said, I'm not ready yet. So my mama said when she was 101. All the way through grade school, I was interested in becoming a sister that I might be able to give myself to God and to teach. I entered the Dominican order in 1936 at this convent in Racine, Wisconsin.
Let us start from the beginning and view the various phases of this life. A girl is an aspirant during her 6-month period of probation or until she has completed her high school education. The 2 years of novitiate are spent studying the rule of the order and putting into practice the vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience.
For 2 years, we study, we pray, we meditate, we come to understand our motto, which is to give to others the fruits of our contemplation.
At last, the longed-for day has dawned, and now the brides are on their way to the chapel to consecrate themselves to the divine bridegroom. Before the altar, they prostrate themselves to implore the mercy and grace of God.
I was never afraid to speak out, but it took me a while to find my calling. St. Catherine of Siena is one who taught us, you just don't take everything. You're obedient, yes, but she went to the Pope and told him, for instance, to get back to Rome where he belongs, and not in Avignon, France. She spoke out. In 1938, I became a novice, and that's when Father Coughlin was speaking in a very ugly way about Jews here in the United States.
I dared you and challenged you to organize so that the people, if not the president, could drive the money changers from the temple.
The system of international finance, which has crucified the world to the cross of depression, was evolved by Jews for holding the people
My
of the
father,
world.
my sister, those that have radios, listen to this. Anti-Semitism, anti-Jewishness was prevalent in America at that time. When the ship, the St. Louis, reached Florida with Jews trying to escape Hitler, they were turned away. The ship was sent back to Europe, and most of the passengers were killed, were slaughtered.
If the church didn't encourage the Holocaust, which I don't believe it did, it was the sufficient, if not necessary, cause. It couldn't have happened without a 1,000-year preparation of the Jews as a pariah people. It had to happen with that story of the Passion, misinterpreted, had poisoned the well, so that the Jews were pushed outside the pale of the people who were worth value.
too, that there were many instances when Christians did not care. Very few did. When I went with my guide to Auschwitz, my guide said to me, "Rose, you could smell the burning flesh 30 miles away, so you can't say that people didn't know about it." A lot of questions came from that. A lot of thinking came from that. And a lot of listening came from that. And a lot of things I heard just didn't fit the picture over there. I couldn't imagine Abraham, Isaac, and all the rest of the early fathers and mothers of Judaism, that they wouldn't be saved. I couldn't imagine that that would ever happen.
This is my body, which will be given up for you. Do this in memory of me.
It is so basic. If we love Jesus, who was Jewish, why don't we love his people, Jews? Mary was Jewish. Joseph was. The apostles were. Jesus died a Jew, lived a Jew, died a Jew. So how is it possible then for us Catholics not to love his people?
The Gospel of Matthew famously has the Jewish crowd say, "His blood be upon us and upon our children." Does this mean that from generation to generation, Jesus' blood is upon the Jews? That's what Catholicism taught until 1965, so it was almost a religious obligation to make sure Jews were miserable.
The gospel texts just don't stand on their own. They have to be explained. They're historical documents with historical implications, with a wider story behind them.
Jesus dies in the year 30. A small group of followers of Jesus begin to gather in grief, lamentation, missing him, reading texts, and telling stories about what he was to them. And in that context, the religion of Christianity begins to be born. When the gospel's being written, it's shaped by a conflict between the followers of Jesus and Jews who reject claims that these people are making. Only the story is told as if it's a conflict between Jesus and the Jews.
Modern people tend to hear references to the Jews in the Gospels as if it's referring to an outside group of people. Jesus is a Christian and somehow the Jews are going after him. But in fact, all of these people are Jews.
In the Gospel of John, written in the year 100, Jews are called the children of Satan by Jesus. And an impulse that is very unlikely to have had anything to do with any opinion Jesus himself might have had 70 years before.
The church fathers